Harvest Moon, or Story of Seasons as it's now known, is one of my favorite video game franchises. It probably looks out of place alongside Final Fantasy and The Legend of Zelda, but there was something so unique and refreshing about a relaxed game that didn't really have an end goal that it instantly struck a chord with me the moment I started playing the original Harvest Moon on the SNES. For anyone confused about the Harvest Moon Story of Seasons thing, here's a really brief, oversimplified explanation. Over in Japan, developer Marvelous was responsible for the creation of the Bokoju Monogatari franchise. They enlisted Natsume to handle the publishing and localization, and so it was released outside of Japan under the name Harvest Moon. Eventually, Marvelous decided to use its own subsidiary, Xseed, to handle this instead of Natsume. Unfortunately, Natsume still owned the rights to the name Harvest Moon, so Xseed was forced to change the name of the franchise to Story of Seasons in 2016. Natsume still releases games from a new development team under the name Harvest Moon, but they're not very good. Marvelous recently decided to remake Harvest Moon Friends of Mineral Town, a game that was originally released on the Game Boy Advance, which was basically a port of Harvest Moon Back to Nature released for the PlayStation 1. I didn't really get around to playing it when it came out. This was back before I had a job or any form of consistent cash flow, so spending money on a game I already owned wasn't all that appealing. Looking back, I wish I had, because the game fixed my biggest issue with Back to Nature, which was the awkward, clunky movement controls. With this remaster now out on Switch and PC, I thought now was the perfect time to finally give this game a fair shot. In most of my reviews, I talk about the technical aspects and then move on to the gameplay. The first thing most fans of the original Friends of Mineral Town will probably notice is the drastic switch in art style. While the original more closely resembled Stardew Valley, the new art style is almost reminiscent of Harvest Moon Magical Melody for the GameCube. I've heard a lot of complaints about the new sprites and portraits, and I can understand the complaints, but for the most part, I disagree. I tend to prefer more cartoony graphic styles, as those types of games tend to hold up better over time. I know it's personal preference, but I really like the idea of being able to boot up a game 2-3 years from now and not have it instantly look dated, and I think that's a big benefit to the more cartoony style over more realistic character models. That's not to say I love everything they did with the graphics. While I like most of the character sprites just fine, I wasn't a big fan of many of the character portraits. I felt like the designs between characters came off as inconsistent, as some models stuck to the cartoony design and others went for a more realistic aesthetic. One thing I really appreciated was the focus on performance. I can't speak to the PC version, but the Switch port has run beautifully at a constant, smooth frame rate the entire time I've been playing. The controls were also pretty intuitive, although there are a couple things I wish I could change. Mainly, it would be nice to be able to use the shoulder buttons to cycle through your backpack. Nothing more embarrassing than trying to pull something out of your bag and accidentally catcalling the girl of your dreams. I did appreciate how easy they made it to swap between tools. Instead of the awkward button combinations in the original due to a lack of buttons on the GBA, you can now swap between tools using the D-pad. The new music was hit or miss for me. I was on board with most of it until I hit my first summer, and then wish I had the option to revert back to the old music. It's not offensively bad, it just doesn't really seem to fit the game's aesthetic and overall relaxed vibe. There's not much else to talk about on the technical side of things. The performance is solid, the controls are pretty good, and visually it all comes down to whether or not you're on board with the new art style. Now let's talk about the game itself. When we first start a new game, life is going great. Presumably. We're not actually given much background into what our character was doing before we picked that new game option, but I assume things were going just fine. Oh look, a special letter. This can only be good news. Well, maybe not. Turns out our grandpa's dead, but at least he left us a farm and... oh. Looks like we've got our work cut out for us. We're then treated to some cutscenes of the one time we ever actually met our grandpa. We must have made quite the impression when we fell off a cow or got chased by chickens that made Grandpa say, "That's who I want running my farm when I'm gone." One of the first things I noticed after being given control of my character was the increased bag space. In the GBA version, you were limited to 3 tools and 3 bag items like crops and flowers. Here we're able to carry 4 tools and 8 items right off the bat. This may seem like a minor change, but it's a very welcome one. Before, it felt like the first backpack upgrade was mandatory the moment you were able to afford it. Now there's a bit more decision making, and that decision will likely be different depending on your playstyle. I think this change is representative of the overall direction of this remake, small but meaningful changes. The other thing I noticed right away is how much more information is at your disposal. Along with a section for your tools and backpack items, there's also a stamina bar to show how much energy you have and a smiley face to let you know if your character is starting to become fatigued. The game will let you keep working after you run out of stamina, but doing so, or working late into the night, will cause your character to become fatigued, eventually causing you to faceplant into a tree stump. So now we've got our tools and farm and we're ready to get started. Doing what exactly? The mayor suggests foraging a bit to earn some quick money, but other than that, you're not given a whole lot of direction. This can be a good or bad thing depending on what you're looking for in a game. As someone who's played nearly every Harvest Moon Story of Seasons game out there, I love not being delayed by lengthy tutorials and a lot of initial exposition. So what can we do now? Well, for starters, we can farm. First, we'll need to clear a patch of land, till the soil, and plant seeds. Seeds are scattered in a 3x3 area around the player, and unlike the original, you are able to walk over crops, meaning you no longer have to leave a space empty in order to reach all your plants. After planting, the last thing we have to do is make sure that we water them each day until they're ready for harvest. Rather than standing here waiting for our crops to grow, maybe we should go meet some of the villagers we'll be living alongside. It could just be a bit of nostalgia, but the cast is easily one of my favorite parts of this game. They probably come off a bit shallow by today's standards, but I think their interactions, not only with your character but each other, help make Mineral Town feel alive. As you converse with people on a regular basis, you'll become better friends with them and they'll start telling you more about themselves. Of course, just like real life, the best way to get people to like you in this game is to just give them things. One of the biggest social aspects in the Harvest Moon franchise is the ability to get married. In addition to the 5 bachelors and bachelorettes in the original Friends of Mineral Town, 2 new marriageable candidates, Jennifer and Brandon, have been added. Also new to this game is the option to have same-sex relationships, bringing the total number of potential marriage options up to 12. One thing that impressed me was how much I liked almost all of the bachelorettes. Normally in a Harvest Moon game, I have my list narrowed down to 1 or 2 of the girls pretty fast, but here it took me almost 2 in-game months to narrow it down to 3. I eventually decided on Ellie, largely due to her resemblance to Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite. I can't really comment on the bachelors too much other than to say that my wife had a similar dilemma of being unable to decide between 3 options. I was disappointed to find out that there are no rival marriages in this version of the game. It's not a huge deal, but it was one of those things that made the town feel more alive, and one of the few things that doesn't require you to do anything other than show up at certain places at the right time. There are still rival heart events, they just don't really lead anywhere. On the bright side, this means that instead of just the rival for your spouse being left out in the cold, everyone ends up bitter and alone. Back on our farm, and it looks like it's time to raise some animals. We have quite a few options at our disposal. There are 2 types of chickens that are functionally the same, just with different plumage, and Angora rabbits, which I personally think look frightening. How do I know that's even a rabbit under there? It could be anything. There's also 4 different kinds of cows that offer different kinds of milk, as well as sheep and alpaca. So far, I've mainly stuck to chickens, which I named after Final Fantasy characters, and cows, which I named after Danganronpa characters. As your animals grow to like you more, the quality of the products they produce will increase. This leads me to one of the few changes I'm not a fan of, the animal affection system. Much like other Harvest Moon games, your animal's affection towards you will go up as you feed them, talk to them, and brush them. Unlike pretty much every Harvest Moon game I can think of, the animals you buy from the stores have their affection capped at half the normal maximum. So instead of getting a total of 10 hearts with each animal, animals that you buy max out at 5 and can never increase. This effectively locks you out of the largest size milk, eggs, and wool. So how do you get 10 heart animals? By breeding them yourself. This isn't too bad for chickens, you just take an egg, plop it in the incubator, and wait 3 days. For everything else, you have to buy a kit that can cost almost as much as the animal itself to use on the animal to make it pregnant. I haven't tried this with the other animals yet, but for cows, it takes them out of commission for 3 weeks because you're not able to milk them. Then at the end of it all, you have to wait even longer for the newborn cow to be able to produce milk. It's not the biggest deal in the world, and I understand what they were going for, but there are so many other ways they could have made breeding your own animals more interesting instead of making it practically mandatory. If all that makes you think you don't want to bother with animals, don't worry. There are 7 harvest sprites, nature sprites, that are willing to do whatever crap you don't want to deal with. You'll have to befriend them first, but it isn't that hard as they'll take almost any gift you give them. Food is usually a safe choice. Even basic ingredients like wheat flour will work. The nature sprites can be assigned to water your crops, harvest them, or take care of your animals for up to 7 days at a time. There are mini games you can play to make them better at each task. I've heard complaints about having to play over and over again in order to raise their abilities enough to be helpful, but I didn't find that to be the case. I did the watering minigame with each sprite once, and that seemed like plenty to get them going. They also get better with tasks the more you assign the sprites to do them, so they'll naturally get better even without the minigames. You'll also want to gather materials so that you can upgrade your house, coop, and barn. You can get wood and stone by chopping tree stumps or breaking up rocks. Upgrading your house allows you to cook food and get married, while upgrading your coop and barn allows you to have more animals, as well as gives you access to tools for making things like cheese and mayonnaise. Of course, you could always give up your life as a farmer and become a miner instead. I don't recommend it, as the money you make from mining stops making a difference very early. Your main reason for mining will likely be to gather ore so that you can upgrade your tools. There's also ore that can be made into jewelry to give as gifts, as well as make machines you'll need to turn milk into cheese or eggs into mayonnaise. You won't be crafting these yourself, instead you'll go to the forge where Gray and his grandpa do everything for you. And their hours suck. In fact, nearly every shop in this game has incredibly stringent hours. How are these people getting by only being open 2 hours a day? My personal favorite is the workshop where you can get your house upgraded. Open 11 to 4, except when I don't feel like being here. Then I'm not open. So what do I think about this game after 80 hours? I loved it. I have a few minor nitpicks like the shop hours or the fact that your animals insist on stacking with each other, making it a pain to interact with them, but I really enjoyed my time in Mineral Town. If you loved the original, I can easily recommend the remake. If you've been interested in playing a Harvest Moon Story of Seasons game and wondered where to start, this game makes a great starting point. Its systems aren't so complex that it feels overwhelming, but also offer enough variety that you'll still have reasons to play even after multiple in-game years. That's going to do it for me. Let me know what you thought about the video in the comments. If you enjoyed it, consider giving it a like and subscribing. It would really help me out. You can also check out my video where I talk about what I think are the best 3 Final Fantasy games to start with, or my review on Romancing Saga 3. If you want more Story of Seasons but are sick of listening to me, and I can't really blame you for either one, check out Gamezilla Media, where my friends from the Legend of Retro podcast talk about one of my personal favorite games, Harvest Moon 64. Link to that in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.